Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is author and very good friend of the show, Mr. John Cameron. John, the court has made a bunch of decisions, and some of them are quite controversial, and the one we're going to talk about tonight is the court has ended affirmative action in college admissions, right? I guess essentially Harvard and, Yale had started to include Asian kids as white kids. And so they were discriminating against Asian people. And I suspect that if they had left the Asian kids as part of people of color, we would still have affirmative action. But the minute that the affirmative action plan started discriminating against people of color, then its time was done. Is my personal view on this. Once affirmative action started discriminating against minorities, it was no longer justifiable legally. Is kind of where I thought of this thing. You know, and it's.
Well, I don't think. Yeah, it's. Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, and you know, the moral question for affirmative action is debatable, right? I can see both the arguments. I can actually see both arguments. But once, for me, it kind of destroyed you destroyed your own argument, did you not, with the whole affirmative action case?
Well, you know, what's weird is that you know, the idea that you can right a previous wrong by creating a current wrong is always a moral dilemma. I mean, you know, the idea of you know, for example, well, I'm not even going to talk about reparations because that comes up every time somebody needs to buy votes by talking about it, and then it never happens. So I'm not worried about it. But you know, the idea, it's is it Kevin McWhorter? He's a famous guy. He's black. He's a linguist. Wrote a really nice article. It's about a 10-minute read in the New York Times. Yes, I read the New York Times. I read it to find out what the enemy's doing. I can usually figure out their thinking, but sometimes I can't. So I read it, and then their thinking is just doesn't make sense. When he talked about it, he benefited from it, and basically they flat out told him he benefited from it, and he felt guilty because he knew that it didn't cause him to work any harder, because he accepted the fact that being black, he could get into wasn't in a great undergrad program, but when he got to grad and his doc and his postdoc stuff, he got in really good schools, and he's a good writer. I don't think he's a great writer, and he's pretty famous, and he accepted the fact that he could slack off a little bit because he's black, and because he's black, he'd get some brownie points to get on a tenure track position. And he admitted to himself that the people who were in the running for those positions that he got the position from were phenomenally more qualified than he was. They'd done much better work. They'd published. They'd done the postdoc stuff. And he felt guilty about it. And he said, you know, I'm of two minds of it. And at the end of the article, he said, and in the end, I'm glad that it's gone. And so, you know, the idea that somehow you can make something in the past that happened not happen by hurting somebody in the present is just crazy to me. And don't we want the best and the brightest to be to get the opportunity to be even better and brighter? Because, you know, one of the things we know from middle school and high school and grade school is that the programs all these programs they canceled for outstanding students have a much greater benefit to society as a whole by turning out these super geniuses that drag us along to ever greater heights than spending the resources on people that will never amount to a whole lot.
Well, I actually get the initial understanding, right? The system was so locked up, you needed the sledgehammer of affirmative action to break it. And I get that. I get that. And I also get the notion that you want to look for those geniuses in places that you might not find them in the other systems. So there are two legitimate reasons for some type of a, we call it affirmative action program, to go looking for those geniuses in places they won't see. But at some point, you have to actually end that program in order to actually accomplish your goal where all of us are actually equal. You have to end the affirmative action programs before you're ready. Otherwise, you'll never get there. As long as the affirmative action programs are in place.
How long have they been in place? 30 years?
It's 45 years, I think. It's
something
been,
like that?
Yeah.
And they probably outlived their usefulness about 20 years ago?
My guess was to be about 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
About 10, 15 years ago, essentially right around when Obama became president would have been right at the time where you could have started peeling back. And instead, we doubled down. That's when we got hold of the whole DEI and those issues, right? The whole, diversity, equity, inclusion, which sound great as a superficial, but then when you go dig down into it and say, okay, how do you actually accomplish it? It's a very scary operation. Those are the kinds of...
all right, they're all scary because and also I think, how do you sit down and chat honestly and truthfully with people and say, okay, there were Jim Crow laws and there was segregation in schools and those things are gone. And they've been gone for a very long time. But somehow this one certain class, this one certain demographic, still need help as if they were still here, whereas a class of people whose parents came over 20 years ago that couldn't even speak English, with no money and no skills and no job, came here and somehow created the wherewithal to have their kids become so good academically that we now have to put a quota in place to keep them out of the school you want to go into. How can you possibly have that conversation with a group of people and not give them the message that you believe that they are somehow less than, not as smart of, not capable, and need extra help?
It seems to be
How can you do that?
Undercutting a culture's sense of itself, right? It's like you can't make it without help, when the fact is they can make it without help. If downtrodden communities turned within each other and built themselves up, they actually don't need outside help.
There are stories all over the place where people have had everything handed to them and failed miserably, and other people have had nothing handed to them and succeeded. I mean, there's very few Arnold Schwarzeneggers out there, but there's some Morgan Freemans out there. And he basically, when he was being drilled about it, he said, people talk about they're locked into this, and they can't get out of it, and that's why we need to have all these programs, da-da-da-da. He said, can't that buy a bus ticket?
Well,
Can't you buy a bus ticket?
Yeah.
So buy a bus ticket. I'm not saying that everyone can lift themselves up by their bootstraps, but what I'm saying is these programs are really designed to create strife and hatred and resentment and all the rest of that.
Well, they even call it the welfare trap, right? Because it's hard to get off of welfare
It's impossible.
because once you start gaining income, you actually lose the support, and there comes a point where it's.
I think you got to make about $65,000 a year to make it worth getting off of welfare.
And you have to jump there, right? Because you can't can't start at 40 and work your way up there, because that's the welfare trap. You either have to
take
make
everything away the minute you get a job.
The minute you start.
So why not do that? Yeah. No. So that's why I believe that is somebody's secret intent to keep people down. I believe that, and I've said this for years, and people get really mad at me, and I'm going to say it and see if I can say it without getting in horrible trouble. I think that the I'll quote someone else, Malcolm X.
Well, now we're really in trouble, John.
No, Malcolm X said, I have to change one word in this. And if our friend was here from a couple of shows ago, he could say it, but I can't say it. I have to change one word. he said that the white liberal is the greatest enemy of the black people there is, because he will pretend to help you, and he does not care about you. You are simply an end to a means for him, and that means is power. And it's not a direct quote. I'll bring the quote in next time a subject like this comes up. So I believe it's intentional to keep a certain demographic group in this country beaten down, so that the liberal politicians in this country can get their vote by convincing them that somebody else is causing the problem, or else they'd never get elected to dog catcher.
Well, let's see what our compatriot, Mr. Richard Fields, has to say from around. So,
and he's going to say, "I'm never inviting you on the show again."
All right. So this is from Mr. Richard Fields.
The United States Supreme Court ruled against affirmative action in college admissions. In a case involving Harvard and the University of North Carolina, two of the oldest colleges in the country, Ivy Leagues no less, the court said colleges could no longer use race as the determining factor in whether or not they were granted admission. In practice, that meant blacks and Hispanics were more likely to be admitted than those of Asian or white heritage, everything else being equal. A little history. Brown versus Board of Education ended the Plessy versus Ferguson legal doctrine of separate but equal. For reasons obvious to anyone who actually looked, separate and equal was not equal. All black schools on the wrong side of the tracks didn't provide the kind of education available to all white schools in the suburbs, for instance. Brown said that public education must be made available to all on equal terms. In 2003, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in her opinion, made an exception. It was in Grutter versus Bollinger. It watered down Brown to allow affirmative action that we have lived with for the past 20 years. O'Connor herself said that in 25 years, affirmative action would no longer be needed. The Roberts Court just shortened that to 20 years, saying eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. If it were not for the fact that the vast majority of colleges in the United States accepted federal aid either directly or in the form of aid to students, affirmative action would not be much of much interest to us as libertarians. We believe that the First Amendment provision for freedom of assembly implies the freedom to assemble with whomever you wish. If a person wished to assemble with a student body more heavily weighted to people of color, we're fine with that. Where libertarians and most other people have a problem is when we must, as taxpayers, fund the education of students with lower academic qualifications at the expense of students with higher academic qualifications. That's what affirmative action does. The 22 or so colleges in the United States which do not accept government funding in any way are free to practice affirmative action however they want to. And we have no problem with that either.
And thank you, Mr. Fields. And, I'm going to round out this subject here with, you can't fight systemic racism with more systemic racism. You're just going to end up with more.
That's what I was trying to say.
More systemic racism. Yeah. And so at some point you have to actually end the systemic racism. And wow, I just said that way too many times.
That's what Morgan, I'm going to add to that. That's why I brought up Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman said in an interview, I said, how do we end this stuff? And he says, quit talking about it. Basically, don't pretend like it exists, but quit focusing on it, you know? And we talked about this in another show. This is coming up a lot, that young people do not see race. Yeah. Young people do not see race.
Well, my grandchildren are 1, 2, depending upon which one, 2, 3, 4 races. So what race are they? They're human.
Yeah.
And at some point, that's what we're going to have to get to.
We're all human.
You're human.
We're all human.
But we're going to stick to the court for a
most
minute.
of us.
AOC, one of your more favorite politicians there,
I
John.
love that woman. She looks good in a red dress.
Has just essentially declared a verbal war on the Supreme Court, which is strange to me because wasn't it just a few years ago where these were the same people wagging their finger at Trump for yelling at the Supreme Court? Wasn't this the same? Again, this hypocrisy of I could do this behavior, but when other people do it, it's different. It drives me crazy, John. And you want to talk about AOC, so knock yourself out on this one.
Well, I wish we didn't have to talk about her. I would really love to see the machinations that went on to get her elected. How much outside money did they have to throw at that? Because they took out not in the sense that she was killed by the mob or anything. Her opponent in it was a pretty well-respected Democrat that got tossed out on his butt, and they put her in.
Yep.
So you've got somebody who's kind of mainstream Democrat, and then you get a socialist. Where did that come from? But the woman's, unless you learn political acumen as a hostess in a restaurant, which is, I think, her highest level job she had before she got into politics.
Well, not exactly. No, she had some administrative jobs.
Yeah.
She's a bartender thing was it's a bit of a myth.
Yeah,
it's like these all.
No, bartending's a high skill. I would.
Well, she was a bartender. She was legitimately a bartender, but
bartenders are pretty good at politics.
She was an activist. She was already an activist, and she kind of applied for the job through the Justice Democrats. And yes, she literally, it was kind of the Justice Democrats threw a bunch of money at a guy who was not paying attention to what was going on around him. So they kind of cherry picked, as the socialists do. They cherry pick the races, and they get a couple wins, but they can only win in a handful of districts. San Francisco, New York, Minnesota. There's a handful of. Portland.
Nobody else is stupid enough to do that, and there's not a lot of stupid people with a lot of money because somebody takes their money away if they're stupid. So, no, she's. Again,
it's just pointing out the hypocrisy.
Attack the court as being, needing a great change and all the rest of that, but support the court when they came up with Roe v. Wade. And I think people don't realize about Roe v. Wade, and I'm not supporting either side here on this, is that RBG, basically, who was a tremendous champion of women's rights, when Roe v. Wade came through, she said, it's a terrible court decision from a legal perspective. It's not going to hold up to scrutiny. It's going to get overturned. Don't put all your eggs in one basket and ride the coattails of Roe v. Wade because it's not going to hold up. And she said that, and nobody seems to remember that. But they were supporting the court when they when they like their decisions. When they don't like their decisions, they don't support the court.
But I don't necessarily mind.
Typical hypocrites.
Yeah, I don't necessarily mind when people complain about a decision and then support another decision. That's perfectly fine. But when you say attacking the court delegitimizes the court, and you can't dare delegitimize the court, but when they delegitimize the court and they attack the court and they say it's no longer legitimate because of its politics, well, no, we're perfectly fine at doing that. And it's that duplicity. I guess it's just and it's so blatant. If it wasn't so blatant, it wouldn't bother me. But it's just so blatant, and they get away with it.
Back to 1984. One day the bad guys are the bad guys, and the very next day the former good guys are the bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys. And
it was always that way.
It's always been that way.
Always been that way. And it's and the goofy legal reasoning. There was another case where I guess the Republicans tried and it was admittedly a goofy kind of legal reasoning.
Shocked by that.
A goofy legal reasoning trying to get I can't even explain it properly. It was so kind of a goofy, but the supremacy of states over federal elections law or something like that. There was anyway, it was a goofy legal reasoning. The Supreme Court said, no, that's a goofy legal reasoning.
Yeah, we're not going to allow it.
We're not going to allow it, which is right. But now the left all of a sudden doesn't allow goofy legal reasoning when we know that they love goofy legal reasoning when it comes to environmentalism or any of these other issues they want, right?
No.
Like as you said,
affirmative action.
Yeah.
It's basically racism, but they like racism if it's in the favor of the people who vote them in.
Yeah.
They don't like it if it's in the favor of the people who vote them out.
Yeah, a puddle is a waterway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
puddle is a navigable water.
Is a navigable
Not
waterway.
anymore, bro.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. The pond you were digging is in your backyard that got filled up is now a wetland.
Yeah.
And you know how the legal reasoning.
No, that got filled up
Yeah, they like all kinds of
37 years ago when water last ran through there. Yeah.
you get all kinds of goofy legal reasoning.
Yeah.
But when somebody else comes up with a goofy legal reasoning, they lose their mind.
Oh.
And again, that's the kind of stuff that actually bothers me. It doesn't bother me.
Hypocrisy
It's just
bothers
blatant.
me.
Yeah, it's just a blatant hypocrisy. And what actually bothers me, it's not even the activist or politician that bother me anymore. I kind of expect it. It's from the average voter that still supports them.
That falls for the 1984-ness of it all. Yeah, I mean, there's a saying, and I don't know who said it, and we should look it up. I should have these 3x5 cards to throw out there with these quotes. People deserve the elected officials they get. You know, that the voter deserves who they vote into power. And if you're really so lazy that you will not hold people to at least be consistent, it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong, evil or good, I don't care, but just be freaking consistent about it. You either be good or be evil, either be logical or be illogical, but at least hold people to some kind of standard. And, the fact that you just vote for them because they're part of the tribe, you're a Democrat, and okay, Democrat's good because I'm part of the Democrat tribe, or Republican's good, I'm part of the Republican. That doesn't hold water with me.
Or even I'll vote Libertarian because I'm part of the tribe. That's
No.
That's not.
Somebody that labels himself Libertarian and then, it's like FDR. FDR got elected to balance the budget and get rid of government power because the government was becoming too powerful. And then the minute he was in office, he became a socialist. So, we've seen a lot of politicians talk one thing, like Richard Nixon, supposed freaking Republican, gets into power, gets rid of gold, puts price controls on things. That's the kind of stuff that it makes me just crazy. I mean, if you're going to be evil, stay evil. If you're going to be good, stay good.
Well, let's have a little fun now. The other day,
you got some of this white powder?
We found there was some white powder discovered in the White House, and this apparently hasn't happened since the Carter administration, or at least it's been public. That proved out to be cocaine. They found the white powder, and of course everybody jumps to Hunter Biden. Has Hunter Biden been in the White House recently?
Hunter Biden jokes up there. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, that just opened the floodgates.
He was more of a crack pipe kind of guy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, he wasn't really a powder guy.
How in the heck does a rich suburban white boy, silver spoon in his mouth, turn to the crack pipe? I mean, that's an unusual choice.
Yeah, well, what it actually tells you is that crack pipe can get anybody.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm glad it wasn't around during my wild periods of time.
A night of ill repute, and you share some things, and next thing you know, you're an addict. That's
that's the thing about addiction is that when I was in the military, I was I'll do this quickly. Believe it or not, James, I'll do it quickly. I was in Europe at a time where it was like in Vietnam. Everybody did opium or heroin or morphine in Vietnam. Not everybody. It's like 50%. And they thought there was going to be a bunch of addicts coming back to the States and got prepared for it. Nobody was addicts. But there are people, I mean, if you go back to a neighborhood where there's a bunch of addicts, you'd probably stay using heroin. But very few people did. The problem didn't exist when the environment that supported it was gone. But there are some people who the first time that needle goes in their arm, they're an addict. And they got a screw loose in their brain, and that crack pipe is the thing that fit in there and turns. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
And it's sad because you've seen it, how it can destroy a life. It doesn't matter what your family is, right? Your family history, your family background, it has no bearing on it. And I know there's a lot of jokes about it, and I get it. I get from a libertarian perspective, we don't really care if people have cocaine in the White House, but I
think based on how the White House is going and as tired as Biden looks, a little coke to pep him up might help.
Yeah, well, his staff is needing to get peppy, is my guess.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of in a kind of a sick way that I'm almost guilty about talking about this. it's kind of funny.
Dude, that's the whole point. That one's just for fun. It's
for fun.
It's more funny than it is anything else. I don't think it's a big issue. Even even if Hunter Biden did bring it into the White House, that's a personal family issue, the medical issue that needs to be dealt with. And sadly, he's not dealing with it.
He's being enabled.
Yeah, enabled, and it's a hard thing. As a parent, it's hard.
Oh no, I get it. I get it, man.
And especially if you're being watched by the world, and how do you deal with that? It's just,
I mean, just a couple of paparazzi following me is all the pressure I need. Oh, yeah, like that's ever going to happen.
All right, we've got like 3 minutes left, John. So girls dropping out of sports is sparking concerns and conversations. A large number of young women are dropping out of sports when they reach puberty. And this has always been a problem, right? It's always young.
It's more of a problem now.
When they're young, yeah. But the problem is exploding is what has happened in the last 5-10 years. It used to always be a problem as girls kind of mature and hit puberty level. They're no longer interested in sports, right? They want to do other things. But now that has dropped off a cliff. And the question is why? And I don't want to jump to kind of the obvious.
I think there's a whole bunch of reasons. The funny thing is with Title IX, the ability of a young lady with good young woman, whatever, with decent athletic skills and great coaching can get a D1 scholarship, and D1 scholarships are worth like $150,000 or something now, or $120,000 now. What are they going to be worth then? So playing that soccer and keeping it up, and if you're a great soccer player with good grades coming out of high school and some decent coaching, daddy and mommy don't have to pay for college, and you don't have to pull down a student loan. So why not? So the fact that this is happening is of concern, and you could say there are tons of reasons for it, and I think probably if you really drill down, the biggest one would still be the fact that these TikTok influencers and all the rest of that have so much distorted how people perceive themselves that they don't want to be sporty anymore. I think that's probably the major reason, but I could be wrong.
It's a strange thing that they don't want to be feminine anymore. They want to be masculine, but they don't want. It's a strange thing because it only happens when they hit puberty. And so, what is that about? And we all know that hormones change, but what it is about puberty and the change of social conditions? I always look at these things like, what's going on in schools? Yeah. What's going on in the schools that are actually making these young women not want to pursue sports?
And you could go to the whole woke thing going on where,
but I think it started before that. I think the trend started before that.
Feminine is no longer something, but then again, if you're kind of, butch, I'm not finding the right word. I don't mean butch.
No, because feminine and masculine don't really work
jockette,
with...
then how can that be? I don't get it. And it's telling us something, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah, and there's so many different inputs from such a large variety of places, from angles, that it's hard. It's a very difficult thing to walk through and figure out. But we need to, because it's not just important for, as you said, the opportunities to go to school on scholarship. Because if you're like a female shot putter or something, you've got a free ride. If you're a javelin, there's one of those track and field sports that don't have a lot of women participating.
You can do well. Rowing was the big way.
John, we are out of time. I am sorry. Thank everybody for in the studio for your help. Thank you, John, for being here, and thank you for watching. And please remember to love everybody. And good night.